Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heresy on the Drive Home. This is our very first episode, and with me is my co-host, Kieran. How you going, bro?
Great, man. Really happy to be here. Looking forward to having a chat about the hobby.
It's good to be finally doing this. We've been talking about it for quite some time.
It's been in the works for a while, yeah.
It has, and now things are finally starting to come to fruition, which is fantastic. For anyone that doesn't know who Kieran and I are, Kieran, you may know as Raptor Imperialis from Instagram, and I am Full Circle Hobby, otherwise known as Adam. I just don't post enough on Instagram. There you go. I've said it. I've got a dying account. You post enough for the both of us, pretty much.
Yeah, well, I get people asking me like why you don't post more. So
Oh no. So this is our drive segment. We are planning some different shows in the future as well, so keep your eyes open for that. But Heresy on the Drive Home is our drive show, and we're keeping it nice and short, tackling a topic at a time. What are we talking about today, Kieran?
Today we're going to start off with talking about how we come up with the ideas and inspiration behind our projects, our different Heresy armies, the models we paint, and we're going to have a chat about where we find that inspiration, and once we've got that spark of inspiration, where do we take it next, and how do we develop the idea into a project that will be an army on the tabletop, hopefully.
That you're doing your co-host job terrific, because that is our first segue into a spark of inspiration. How do you come up with that spark of inspiration to start a new project and to start developing an army idea? What's your sort of first step, Kim?
Well, finding the spark of inspiration usually isn't the issue, is it? I think often we have too much inspiration. I'm always thinking of, a new army, a new idea, like something I want to start next that never happens. It's all being filed away.
Something new comes out and you immediately want to buy it.
Exactly right. Yeah, just seeing someone else's work, seeing something online, reading something new, new models, like you said. There's always just too many ideas to ever get around to. But that's a fantastic thing. It keeps the creative juices flowing, keeps you thinking about the hobby, keeps you always trying something new, which I really enjoy. There are plenty of different
for yourself,
places.
where do you cherry pick your ideas from? Let's say I've finished what I've been working on now. I've done this collection. I'm ready for something new. Where's the sort of first place you start to look?
There are a few places, and it's not always. I'm not always consciously out there looking for the next project. Often you'll just stumble across it in your regular hobby activities. A lot of the time, I'll find inspiration in the novels. The Heresy novels in particular we're talking about here. But also, there's the black books. So it can come from a range of different places, and even seeing other people's hobby is always a huge inspiration. I've had different projects are inspired by different things for me. For the the Alpha Legion, they were inspired by a specific story in a Black Library novel. It was the Wolf King novel. The Alpha Legion are hunting the space wolves in the Alexis Nebula and culling them after Prospero, after your boys got done in.
Oh, don't get me started, please.
I know, and we all know you're a big Space Wolves fan.
This is a positive. We're trying to be positive here. It's our first episode.
It's a safe space. Yeah, don't mention the wolves. Yeah, but anyway, it was actually just the cover art for that story that really inspired me. It was Lehman Russ just killing 1,000 Alpha Legion Tartarus Terminators, and that's how I got started. The Terminators had just been released in the they came out in the Prospero box, didn't they? Yeah, in the burning of
Yeah.
Prospero box, and that was my inspiration for that army. Just the cover of a novel combined with the new models coming out, um,
Mm,
and that was all it took.
yeah. Interesting. I think for myself, once I feel that I've finished a particular project, I mean, I can use the Thousand Suns as an example. I got to a stage where I was just sick of painting candy red for the time being. I felt like I had played with the army more than enough. I was ready for something new. And I
Yeah,
think where I try and look for a spark of inspiration is to find a challenge for myself. And that's normally, well, what is something that maybe hasn't been done before or hasn't been seen? Or what sort of legions do I feel that may be unrepresented that I can breathe some new life into? I think that sort of rang true for the salamanders the most,
yeah,
where I almost encourage myself to motivate and find the inspiration within that challenge.
that's
Um,
really cool. Yeah, I
and
I
then
was
leveraging off that in different ways, but keeping that
yeah,
sort of spark of inspiration at the core of what the Army project is.
very cool. Yeah, I was just gonna say, it seems like we have very different ways of going about finding inspiration. I
Mm,
kind of accidentally bump into my inspiration, but obviously you think about it quite carefully and go looking for particular sources of inspiration. So, what kind of challenges are you looking to kind of meet or kind of take on when you're looking for those new challenges for a new project?
good question, because I think they differ from project to project. I'm a bit of this may sound really lame, but I'm a bit of a goal setter when it comes to army projects or painting projects
Hmm.
or whatnot. So with the Thousand Suns, it was an army idea that I've wanted to do for ages, but in order to execute it at a level I was happy with, I had to really develop my sculpting skills in order to do the conversions and add different embellishments to the models that fit my own vision of what the force should kind of look like. So that was that particular goal that I had with the Thousand Suns, and then coming up with a new challenge or a new goal for the Salamanders was, well, everyone really just rags on the Sallies. I mean, yeah, they were completely obliterated at Istvan, and 97% of the Legion or whatever the crazy number is, they were wiped out. Everyone rags on them. How could I develop an army that people could look at and not make fun of, but be like, hey, you know what? That's actually pretty cool. That's a really cool take on on the salamanders. I wouldn't have thought about that, or I don't really. I couldn't see the salamanders like this up until um, you started making some models, or so I think using that as motivation as well is a good challenge. So I think for each specific army project, I always set a little individual goal to sort
Yeah,
of stretch or maybe like push a particular skill set or stretch something else. So I mean, and then aesthetically wise, we can discuss our painting methods sort of later on down the road, but just on the topic of goals, I wanted something that was a little bit more realistically weathered. I wanted something
yeah,
that was a little lower in contrast, not so high contrast, punch in the face color scheme, and then use that as a challenge, but kind of work out within myself where to kind of break new ground and develop my own skills within that sort of goal setting
yeah.
aspect. Um,
Yeah, your glaive's a really good example of that. You know, obviously it's still like it's not a bright green salamander green, but it's a green tank that's, you know, not
mm,
realistic in that regard. It's not military kind of camouflage style, but the weathering you've done on it is very subtle, and you haven't gone with a high gloss finish on anything. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think
it's all incredibly matte and a little bit drab. But you still want to keep that core essence of um, um, having a color scheme
fantasy.
that is interesting to look at.
Yeah, yeah,
So, you know, and just to touch on other areas of where you might find some inspiration, I always find that looking at color plates, like you said, is a
yeah,
really good source for that. And then working maybe, well, how can I match this color plate as best as possible, or maybe cherry pick just certain ideas from that color plate that you want to sort of transpose onto your own models. It's always great looking through Instagram and seeing what other people are doing. Maybe like a particular color on something, and whether it be somebody else's cloth or red or bone or whatever the color may be, and then using that as your spark of inspiration to start something new in those colors. Or maybe you like a particular conversion or a particular set of armor mark. Maybe that's your spark. So it'd be great to actually hear what other people use as their spark of inspiration. So if you do want to let us know, drop a comment
yeah,
below, because it's really interesting that I bet everyone's got a different take on what their sort of spark of inspiration might be. It
yeah.
might
I
be
think there
nothing
are
to
some.
do with the actual hobby itself. It might be a gaming source of inspiration that brings upon the force. It might
True.
be a
Yeah,
style of playing. It
yeah,
might be that spear tip army or that drop pod assault
yeah,
force,
yeah,
you know, and that's
yeah,
fucking sick.
yeah. I think there are some kind of universal kind of things that we all get our inspiration from. You know, the novels, the official artwork in the black books, other people's work. But
Mm,
like you said, there might be some other aspects that we're not considering that other people find particularly inspirational. So yeah, it would be fantastic to hear from people if there are any other avenues that they find their inspiration, because you
mm.
know we're hobbyists as well. We're always looking for fresh sources of you know, inspiration, trying to find that spark. So
Yeah.
yeah, let us know if you've got any other ideas for us. We'd definitely like to check it out.
So after you've got your spark of inspiration, what sort of material or resources do you go to personally to then start developing this idea?
Well, once I've found the spark of inspiration, say for example, if it's in that in Wolf King, the example I gave earlier with the Alpha Legion Tartarus Terminators, then I'll go further and I'll make sure I read the whole novel. I'll try and read any material that's around it. So in that kind of sense, there was material to do with Chondax. Later, when it came out, the Chondax campaign in the Black Book. But at the time, I think it was Black Book 3 with the Alpha Legion art. There was Alpha Legion Tartaros art in that book. So yeah, you start off with the basic idea and then just expand out on it. And these days, we're so spoilt with the internet and so many different resources that you can literally just, you know, engine search Tartaros
Mm,
Terminators Alpha Legion, and it'll come up with so many different examples. So yeah, you just jump right down the rabbit hole, embrace it all, just try and find, you know, the bits that kind of speak to you. There'll be a lot of stuff out there that doesn't speak to you, but if you have something in your head already, a little nugget of an idea, it's really easy to tease it out and to kind of grow it into a fully
yeah,
fledged concept just by exploring a little bit and checking out and having a look to see what's out there.
yeah. The exploration is a deep rabbit hole. You're right. It can
And it
go
can take a
on and
long
on and
time as
on.
well.
Yeah, it
You
could
can
take
be
ages. For me
thinking about an
personally,
army for
it
years.
takes
Yeah.
ages.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I've had, you know,
And
ideas for armies that have taken years to actually come around and start painting the first models.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And
Yeah.
I think you bring up a good point where, you know, you get into this frame of mind where you are open just to absorbing it all
Yeah.
and digesting it all, and then
Yeah.
going through the process of finding parts that you like or want to extrapolate upon with your own army ideas.
Yeah.
Do you commonly look to things like the old black books, Black Library novels. Maybe, you know, when it comes to particular kits or conversions, or color schemes, like are there any other resources that you might go to?
Um, I use all of the resources you just named. I think probably Black Books would be my primary resource,
Mm,
just because I think they have a little bit more detail in them. Obviously, there's a huge amount of detail on the different characters that inhabit the heresy in the novels, but the novels don't often have that much detail about the legions per se, or what they were up to, or how they actually fight their wars.
good point.
So I find that the Black Books are my primary resource, even if the initial kind of spark of inspiration comes from the more kind of dramatic aspects of the Black Library novels. So,
Mm,
I'll get that spark from reading about a particular character, and then I'll go into the Black Books and explore that legion, and yeah, just dive a little bit deeper into it, because in the Black Books, in the novels, they're very descriptive, but they don't, you know, a Sicaran battle tank might be mentioned like 3 times in like 60 books, right? Like they don't have that much specific detail. Like I can't remember, the Tartaros Terminators might be mentioned like a couple of times in all of those books. They don't go into the granular kind of detail. They might talk about tanks, or they might have a battle tank or a Terminator, but they're not going to go into armor marks, different marks of weapons, and that kind of thing. And that's the kind of detail I go to a Black Book for, because they give you that kind
yeah.
of extra flavor. Like, you find out that the las cannon is the Emperor's Children's, favorite heavy weapon, because it's a precise weapon that appeals to their kind of way of war. And,
Mm,
they preference armor marks that give them maneuverability and, improved sensors rather than improved, frontal armor. So you go in there and you find out that, Mark 4 suits them better than Mark 3. And, you just get all those kind of granular details
yep.
from the Black Book, even
Yep.
though the actual spark of inspiration may have come from somewhere um, more
Other than,
entertaining or more dramatic, such as the Black Library novels. Yeah,
yeah, I think you're completely right. The old Black books are like the apex number one resource,
yep,
um, for me as well. They do have that level of detail in there, like you mentioned, and it may it contrasts to the Black Library books, right?
yeah,
It
yep,
is contrasting, but they do work in tandem as well.
they
So
do. Yeah,
yeah, I find that contrastingly, a Black Library novel might um, be featured around a particular moment or a particular character or series of characters, or a particular battle. Whereas the Black Book will actually give you the modus operandi of each legion from front to back.
yep,
Um, how they conquered worlds in the Great Crusade, their approach to warfare, any um, ideals, maybe fracturing ideals, within the Legion that determine how they fight their wars, what
yep,
units they select, their panoply of war. What's that consist of? What sort of theaters do they fight in? Where do they prefer to fight? What are they good at? What are they not good at? All these, really, they're almost like it's like almost a logical breakdown or a logistical breakdown of your force, and it's a level of detail that like you said, you don't get necessarily from a Black Library book.
hmm,
One almost feels like an instruction manual, and the other one almost feels like fanfic. You know what I mean? Like that's being
yep,
really um, um,
derivative. Yeah, but
exaggerating. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
But they're the two extremes where you can pull from. That's just that's the point I'm trying to make essentially.
yeah.
But I
With
do
my
think,
with
yeah, it is the number one resource, 100%.
yeah, with my Emperor's Children. So like I read, the Black Library novels. Like I love Saul Tarvitz as a character. I want an Emperor's Children army. I'm going to make an Emperor's Children army. That's the spark of inspiration that set
Mm,
me on the path. But then if I want to know what an Emperor's Children army actually looks like, then I go to the Black Books and find out which units they prefer, what they would look like. and in turn that kind of informs the army that I'm going to play on the tabletop.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a
Yeah.
direct fix. It doesn't go like straight from one to the other, but it's definitely definitely informed by what's in the black book. You know, like I chose assault marines as my core troops in for the Emperor's Children because the black book says they loved assault marines. You know, I had jet bikes in the army, even though they're not like a massive unit in the game, because the Emperor's Children love jet bikes. You know, I try to stay away from units that they don't prefer. And of course,
Yeah.
with the fluff of the legions, right, like anything can be justified pretty much. But for
Yeah.
me personally, I like to collect an army that is very typical of that faction or that legion.
Yeah.
So even though like I could do a heavy assault Emperor's Children company, that's not something that I would probably do. I want to,
Yeah.
you know, do something that's fast, something that's maneuverable.
Because you want to
You know,
lean into
precision on a
that,
weapon.
as accurately as possible, really,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with
And
what's
while
written.
those other, you know, while that heavy assault company wouldn't be unfluffy because they had them
Yeah.
in the fluff,
Yeah.
it doesn't really kind of represent the legion as a whole. And you know, our armies, you know, they're small little collection of models on the tabletop, but they are representations of the legion, you know, as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. I mean, that's where I first saw the story of the Ebon Drake
Yeah,
and what the Salamanders started to do post Istvan, and more so how they started to change post Istvan, and what they became after they got decimated.
yeah,
And for me, that was like a whole brand new outlook on what the salamanders are and what they sort of become towards the end of the heresy. They always kind of and I took them this way as well. I always saw them like the super best friends legion. They're friends with everyone, and that's kind of boring.
it's very boring, and especially
You
if you
know what I
just
mean?
read
When
the
you've
Black
got,
Library novels. Yeah,
well, yeah, you can't really. Well, I didn't really choose to use the Black Library novels as a reference because they're just not really written that
well,
well,
they're
I don't
very
think.
limited in their scope as far as like the actual
Yes.
legion is concerned, right? It focuses on a
Yes.
couple of characters going around, a few Shattered Legion warriors,
Mm.
but it doesn't really
But
tell the
there's
story of
got
the
to be
legion.
something more than that, you know.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
to find
Yeah,
this, to find this story of the Ebon Drake, and then the Promethean cult and how that kind of radicalizes the salamanders and then starts to change them. That was again another spark of inspiration that followed from my little goal setting challenge, and then all the ideas started to snowball after that.
yeah.
So let's talk
Yeah.
about then maybe starting to develop these ideas. How do you go from taking all that resource material and then developing them into a force?
So once I've, you know, taken my inspiration from novels or other people's work, and then I've gone in to the black books and done the research on the more kind of granular detail of the Legion, I like to do a test model fairly early on in the process, just to see if you know, I can paint something that aesthetically matches how I see that Legion or how I imagine them to be in the fluff, and if I can get something that balances the fluff of the Legion with an aesthetic that I think, you know, is both pleasing to paint and that also looks good on the tabletop. Because for me, like, hobbying and painting is a massive part of the hobby. It's probably the most important part of the hobby for me. So, you know, while I do put a lot of effort into writing lists that represent the Legion and that will be effective on the tabletop, for me, that aesthetic aspect is super, super important. And that's
Mm.
why I like to paint a concept model fairly early on. I don't know. Do you paint test models? I've never really seen you paint a test model. Is that something you do, or do you kind of
I
get
don't
to
really
a
see
stage where
myself paint anymore,
you're ready to
Kieran. I don't know
go?
what's going on.
I see you kind of coming out with more kind of fully formed kind of ideas
I think so
and
because
just
I
jumping
sit
straight
on
into
them for
them. Yeah,
so long. So
yeah,
in that resource material gathering phase, it I digest it for a long time. I'm talking months.
yeah,
Um, with the salamanders, I was sitting on ideas, just thinking about them, thinking about my sort of approach, working that in with what I think may work aesthetically, as well as fluffy as well. And it could take me 6 to 12 months of ideas and plotting and spitballing these little things around in my own brain before I actually go, yep, I'm locked in. I know exactly what I'm doing now. And I'm going to be happy doing this for the next 18 months or however long the project is. I know that's not everyone else's workflows, and that is a little bit unrealistic for some, or maybe boring for others too, because how can you just be on that one path for so long, when, like you said, inspiration can spark at any time. However, I always feel like that gives me confidence going into a project. So I've already thought about the color scheme, and I think relying on the backbone of painting experience that I've got, I can kind of visualize it in my head, and I'll know what works. I'll be 90% there in my own head, and I'll get the other. I'll nut out the other 10% when it comes to painting my first model or painting my first unit, or after I do the test model, I'll be like, "Yep, this worked, just as I thought it might." For the next lot of models, I'm going to change X, Y, and Z, and then I'm going to sort of stick with that until I'm unhappy with something else, or a new idea comes along where I might be able to take those things a little step further. So I'm not punching out test models day by day or whatever, and looking for something to carry that inspiration forward. I'm more so working that idea back to front, I guess.
Can I just bring up one of these pictures of your salamanders and just
go for
maybe get you to your cataphracti terminators, your fire drakes. Just can you talk me through some of the ideas here, like why these models and why not the official ones per se, or what's your thinking here?
Yes, actually, great point. Why not the official ones? I'm actually not the biggest fan of the official ones. I think that I know lots of people like it. Me personally, it's not to my taste, but the amount of scales and dragon icons and flames and all the sculpted details on, especially the Legion specific models, all the extra sculpted detail is it makes the models look really cluttered. Compositionally, the models don't really breathe. I know that's like a strange term to use. They don't really allow for any of your own personality to come through in these models. So things like the fire drakes, like you said, like you're not the biggest fan of the fire drake models or the shields or anything like that. And I also think those models are tending to look a little bit dated as well. I think it's more better suited to like a 40K aesthetic, where things are maybe over exaggerated a little bit. The flames and the scales, and they're all dialed up to 11. And to me, it just looked a little cringy maybe. And I just wanted to pull that back a lot, because what I was sort of developing in my own head was, these guys change a lot after Istvan, even though they're still loyalists. Well, that's questionable as well. Even though they're changed, they are changed by the events that happen to their legion, and that doesn't come without any sort of psychological scarring, I don't think, whether you're a space marine or not. So my real idea was, well, how can I lean on that sort of that sense of emotion, maybe that sense of loss or dread, and translate it through the model. So I wanted something that looked really cold, even though,
typically they're a warmer
they're a
legion
loyalist
with
sort of scheme.
yeah.
I wanted them cold. I wanted them prickly to look at. I wanted them a little bit agnostic when it comes to, are these guys loyalists or are they traitor? It turns out, the most radicalized ones and the ones that follow, the Promethean cult and Cassian Dracos and stuff like that, they become Black Shields. And I think it's the assault on the Nyakan city story, like little short story. They basically land in a war zone that's between the Iron Warriors and the Imperial Fists or something like. Anyway, there's loyalists versus traitors.
I think it's the Emperor's
and they basically they just start blasting, and they've got their own sort of mission in mind, and they were killing loyalists and traitors alike, and I know the loyalists were trying to make contact with them, and they just said nothing. They just went for their own objective, So
I just remember them escaping on a mag train or something at the end.
something, or they went into a tunnel or something like that. At the end, they had their own. Yeah, they had their own objective in mind.
Yeah.
So
I really
the
like
idea for them was to make them a bit colder, more prickly, more spiky.
How did you go about achieving that on your models? Like, they're noticeably, like the way you describe them, that kind of cold, sharper kind of aspect. They're definitely not, lovey-dovey, give you a hug salamanders.
Yeah.
How did you translate that onto the models?
That's a long-winded question, I think. I'll try give you the short version.
I was going to say I could give you the brief, like what I see.
What do you think? Maybe briefly, because I'm so attached to this project, I could talk about it for ages.
Like from the modeling kind of aspect, you've used kind of some more brutal elements like spikes, which I really love. It almost has a Sons of Horus kind of vibe to it. Some of the helmets. Very kind of like, clean armor plates as well, like plenty of space to express yourself color-wise without all of that sculpted salamander detail. And then in the paint job itself, you've got that really beautiful verdigris that sets off the bronze really nicely, which adds to the cold aspect of the armor. And then the green itself has a lot of blue in it, which is a bit uncommon for Salamander's armor, I think.
Yeah.
So it gives it that kind of, that eerie, that kind of slightly off kind of look. They're still obviously Salamanders, like they couldn't be mistaken for any other legion, but they definitely have like your own personal signature on them.
I think you can just talk about my models from now on, because that's more succinctly put than I could ever do, I think.
I think it's sometimes easier to look at other people's models, right? Because you don't have all the background information in your brain.
You're not carrying the baggage in your mind.
The 3 years of planning.
Having to go through with these things. Yeah, but you're right. I wanted to lean into the spikier studs and that sort of stuff, because it does give that brutalist sort of aesthetic, along with spikes and spines and stuff. They also subconsciously translate to big lizards and dinos and that sort of stuff as well, which is sort of intrinsic to the salamanders. And like I had these heads designed for me based upon an idea or a conversion that I had made, and that sort of, even that frontal plate that goes on the forehead of the helmets here for the fire drakes, I wanted that to look like almost like a dinosaur,
a beak, I guess, dinosaur, or a lizard,
have that
or something,
that essence, whether it's like a triceratops horn or I don't know dinosaur name. Ankylosaurus, is that the one that like butts heads and stuff with other dinosaurs?
I think that was the triceratops. I think you had it right the first time.
Okay. Just subconsciously linking that back to something that is that resonates legion wise, as well, but also
Yeah,
something that, a viewer
without being
can pick
painfully
up and
obvious,
look
right?
at.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's subtle.
And
You have to kind of buy into that kind of aesthetic nod towards lizards. It's not like right in your face. It's not. I know you've done some subtle lizard skin on some
mm,
models, but it's not all over the model. They're not covered in lizard teeth. They
yeah,
don't
you don't
have
have to
printed lizard
plaster it on. Just
icons
be
on
like,
them.
yeah, flames,
Yeah.
scales, lizard skin, hammers. Where
Yeah.
the salamander? Yeah, it doesn't have
They
to
look
be
like
like that, I guess.
they look like space marines with salamander flavor rather than, the other way around, salamanders with space marine flavor, which is what all the
Yeah.
legions should look like at the end of the day, right? They should be space marines first,
Yep.
flavor on
Well,
top
that
afterwards.
that that probably comes to a good stage of the discussion. Was like, how do you find that right balance between all
Yeah.
the ideas that you've kind of absorbed and digesting and want to get onto the plate? How do you strike the right balance?
Yeah. It is, yeah, it's a challenge, right? So for
Mm,
me, often that's, I'll work through that aspect of it with the test models. So, for example, um, this was the test model for my second Emperor's Children army. It was a basic, basic loyalist army. I wanted to represent the Legion as it would be right before its fall.
yep.
So I have included there's weathering like all across that model. There's weathering powder all across it. I've done like chipping techniques everywhere, but at the same time, I wanted, you know, the aesthetic kind of beauty of the Emperor's Children Legion, that
Mm.
cleanness. So, if you pick it up and look closely, there's a lot of detail and weathering on it, but from a distance, I wanted it to look like that kind of pristine Legion.
It's still got the beauty and the radiance to the Emperor's Children, right?
Yeah, yeah, but I didn't,
Finding that blend between the maybe like the artistic and the realistic, like where's that needle
yes,
kind of
yeah,
lie?
yeah.
And
Some
did you
legions
come
are
to
like
that sort
that.
of conclusion through trial and error?
Um, yeah, like to be honest, I'd never tried a heavily weathered option because I knew that that purple was the number one thing I really wanted to get right, and I didn't want to dilute it or take away from it with too much, you know, additional detail that was kind of a little bit unnecessary. I didn't want to dilute it, so I tried a lot of different purple paints, to get the
Yep.
perfect purple that I thought represented the Legion. And once I had it, I didn't really want to kind of distract from it. So, I didn't experiment all the way weathered, but I definitely, I did clean ones, and then I just added in the little touches of weathering. But I was, like you, this model was um, many years in the making, right? Like, it didn't take me long to paint at all, but it took
Yeah.
me
Well, this is your second Emperor's
three
Children
or
force,
four.
and your first force
Exactly.
was considerably large as well. So you
Yeah.
you you'd already had that first force as almost like a practice run, right?
Yeah. So I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew what my limitations were with that first force. Like you spoke earlier about taking on a new challenge for a new project.
Mm.
I kind of go about it a little bit differently. I recognize when I can't, when something is beyond me, and I'll store it away in my brain. Like I can't get that exact kind of perfect purple that I want, but when I learn how to do that, then I'll do that project. Or, I need these Aquilas on the chest plate. I can't sculpt them, but once I figure out what to do, I'll come back and do it. So I don't necessarily set myself a goal to achieve during a project, but once, just through the natural kind of process of experimentation and hobbying on other projects, I learn new skills. And in the case of this model, I learned I had learned how to airbrush since my previous Emperor's Children army.
Yeah.
So, the colors that were now available to me, there was 10 times more colors that I could choose from when trying to
Mm.
find that perfect purple because I had access to an airbrush. And the perfect color turned out to be an ink, which I would not have been able to use properly without an airbrush.
Yeah.
So, I always had that idea in my mind. And once I'd picked up that skill through hobbying, I was able to, you know, bring that idea out and finally realize it physically on the tabletop. And that's been like that for a few projects for me, like just learning a new skill and then going, aha, I had this idea, 5 years ago. Now I can try it out. So yeah, I
Yeah.
suppose slightly different approach to you, but yeah,
I
the
can
painting.
see where you're coming from though, and just by looking at it, you do have little hints of Emperor's Children embellishments on, like you mentioned before, um, a plainer canvas to work on. So I think those little
Yeah,
Emperor's Children embellishments, they stand out more.
yeah, yeah.
And dare
That's
I say,
exactly
the
right.
purple is perfect for that legion.
Thanks, bro. Yeah, but like you, I wanted him, to look like Space Marines first, Emperor's
Yes.
Children second. So
Yeah.
the Emperor's Children,
So
every one of
with
them has an Aquila, but apart from that, like, the only kind of flavor is usually just through transfers, and they're usually pretty, you know, tastefully limited in a way.
yeah, so with something like this, what you're painting now, is this one of those ideas that goes back from that 5 year time capsule that you're now sort of bringing out, or what? Talk me through this.
Kind of. So I've been waiting for plastic 40K Emperor's Children models for 15 years. So I've had a lot of,
Hallelujah.
yeah, I've had a lot of ideas in that time. But unlike the Loyalist Emperor's Children, where I found it easy to settle on, in my mind at least, on a scheme, even though I couldn't apply it at the time, I've always found the Traitor Emperor's Children extremely difficult to conceptualize, just because of how, chaotic they are. Like,
Mm,
the way they're described in the novels is impossible to paint. The range of
yeah,
different colors, colors that make you look physically, make you feel physically ill to look at.
yeah,
It's just unrealistic. You can't paint every single model in 1,000 different rainbow shades and make your opponents feel sick by just looking at them on the tabletop. So I had to try out a few different things, and I wanted to really push that kind of that garish look, while at
mm,
the same time having something that would look good on the tabletop. So it needs to have that uniformity and be easily recognized for what it is, while still trying to, push the envelope in some way to
yeah. So
create something new and something that, speaks to their fluff in some regard.
yeah,
So that's why I went for that, extreme kind of contrast metallic purple or pink.
yeah,
And I've painted metallic purples before, but nothing quite like this. Like, the brightest areas really are silver, whereas before it would definitely be like purple that is metallic, whereas this one is like, it's a metallic that's shaded with pinks and purples.
yeah,
So yeah, just trying to find that, what works for me, and I still haven't found it. Like, I'm pretty happy with what I've done here,
yeah,
but I wouldn't paint an army like this. It's not good enough for me yet. There's something
yeah,
missing.
yeah.
It's beautiful, but
Valid.
it's just not. It doesn't quite kind of speak to what I'd expect.
Mm,
So maybe I'd try a few more of these models to try and find something that works. But as it is at the moment, um, yeah, it's just experimenting. Like this model here, for example, that's the model I painted prior to the one that I just showed before, and that's where I
mm,
kind of worked on that rose pink, silver kind of tint,
yeah,
before translating it onto the full model. And that's part of my process of painting test models that I spoke about before, and why it's an important aspect of the process for me. It looks kind of ridiculous on this model, right? Like, because there are no details on this model that identify it as an Emperor's Child or a Traitor. It's just a generic plastic Mark 6 model. It's purely kind of a test canvas for the colors. So I was
yeah,
trying out a more vibrant magenta, a matte one, using contrast paints, because previously I've always used inks on my Emperor's Children, and inks are a pain in the ass. They're difficult to use. They do create fantastic results, but I wanted something that was a bit more kind of easier to use, a bit more manageable, and that I could show off a bit more detail in. So I just used this
mm,
model as an experimental kind of canvas just to try a few things out. But it's hard to know what it's going to look like until you actually try it on a model that has the trim, that has all of the aspects and details of what your project will have. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just a part of the process, and this model is also part of the process. It's definitely not, a finished article. I'm going to finish this model, like get it done, and I'll get it done hopefully in the next couple of days. But I can already tell that it's not what I want completely, and maybe that's just because that of this particular model. Perhaps if there was a cloth element on this model, I could add a bit more color in, which is what I want. I want to add some different colors in without doing, the shin guard one color, the shoulder plate another, the power pack one. I don't want to have like a fully rainbow marine, but I need to add more color in there somehow. So this is
Yeah.
just
It's
part of the project. So
interesting.
yeah,
Sorry. It's interesting. I'm just focusing on what you said about this particular model. Like you're happy with it, but
yeah,
you don't want to paint an army like this. So
yeah,
when you go through this process of experimentation and developing your ideas, you need to be fully on board with an idea before you're like, yeah, let's pull the trigger on it.
yeah. I think so. Like that's that is what the test models are for, right? So
Yeah.
I need to have it nailed down for what I want, because I don't want to start the project with one squad and then kind of go, oh, it's not exactly what I want. Change it
Mm,
up a little bit on the next squad, and there,
yep.
inevitably there are differences between the squads and the units that I paint, because things change slightly between each set of back
Yeah, it's
painted
normal.
models.
It's normal.
But
Yeah.
I don't want to do that intentionally. I want to avoid that if possible. So like
Yeah.
on this model, for example, the gold is my traditional gold, the one that I always paint. I'm happy with
Mm,
that. That wasn't an experiment. That was just kind of to see how it worked with the pink. I'm really happy with the pink. I think it works really
mm,
well.
yep.
I would definitely use it on other models, but I'm not. It's not the complete package for me. Yeah.
That's it. And I agree. I think it needs to be the complete package, especially if you're going to spend the next 18 months painting that over and over and over and over again in different incarnations, right?
Yeah, exactly. You need to be comfortable with it. There's nothing that'll kill your mojo quicker than finding yourself
Mm,
partway through a project and then just losing interest, or um, you know not feeling the vibe for it. It kind of happened to me with
yeah.
my Death Guard project. I was really happy with how it looked, but it just didn't really kind of speak to me. The Death Guard don't give me enough kind of freedom really to express myself in the painting
Mm,
process. And I want to be
mm,
true to the
yeah.
Death Guard. And to be true to the Death Guard is to, keep them basic, keep them plain, utilitarian. They're the Workman Legion. And
Yeah.
that just didn't give me enough freedom to play with on, individual models or individual characters, different markings, and that kind of thing.
Mm,
So, you really have to get that balance right. And you have to know, I think you have to know what you want before you jump headfirst right into a project. And I've said it, 100 times already, but that's why I paint so many test models. I paint a lot of test models, and it's so that I have a good idea or a good vibe for, any project that I might want to pick up at some stage. And I might change them from that test model, but I've already got, 90% of it kind of conceptualized and actually, worked out and painted. So yeah, that's why test models are so important to me. And like you were saying, like I do like to make sure I have everything kind of nailed out before I get started. And I know you're the same. We just
mm,
come to that kind of point a little bit differently. Like I have
mm,
my test
yeah.
models, whereas you'll have that very kind of methodical and concise conceptualization and research done.
Yep.
But at the end of the
Yep.
day, like we both know what we want before we start a project, right? We know what we want to achieve,
Absolutely.
and we know exactly
Absolutely.
how we want things to look.
Yep.
So, we might come up with fresh ideas during the project, but they're only fresh ideas that will build onto or, complement what we already have. It's not a fresh idea that takes the project in a different direction.
100%. 100%. That is the perfect place to end, I think. Anything
Spot
more to
on.
add, you think, Kieran?
No, just I hope people enjoyed that. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, give it a like, and we'd love to hear from you as well in the comments. If you have anything to say regarding what we've said, if you disagree with us, if you agree with us, please let us know. If you'd like to give us ideas for future discussions or something, if you'd like us to elaborate on anything we've touched on in this episode,
Yeah, that'd be
please
great.
get in touch. Leave a comment on YouTube, or check us out on Instagram at Full Circle Hobby or Raptor Imperialis for me. We're always open. We love to hear from people, so just get in touch.
Yeah, I think there's also a second part of this discussion to come, right? Like, taking these ideas now that we're fully confident in them, and okay, what's that going to look like? What kits am I using? What units am I selecting? How can I individualize these things, personalize them for my force, and then build something that you're proud of, really. So I think that might be a discussion that we'll come back to in the future for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Love it.
All right, guys, that is it for today. We're all over Red Rover. Make sure you stay hard for Heresy, and we'll see you soon.
See you next time.
Hard for Heresy.